A student told LSAC they only needed 25% more time on the LSAT because that's what their university gives them, so that's what they asked for. And LSAC said, no, take more time, we don't go that low. And that one story tells you everything because internal LSAC research proves that some of the scores they are sending to law schools are wrong. And that's not my opinion, that's not speculation, that's LSAC's own researchers publishing studies showing that scores earned with extra time don't predict law school performance the way standard scores do. Their data shows those scores consistently overpredict how well students are going to do. The score says top quarter, but the law school grades come back bottom quarter. And law schools don't know who had extra time during the test. They see one number, there's no flag on the score, there's no asterisk on the score. They treat every score the same, even though the organization that produced the score has published research saying they shouldn't. Now, on top of all that, approved LSAT accommodations have increased 34x in the last decade. 34x. The approval rate is 98%. And by the way the rules are currently written, an estimated half to three quarters of all LSAT test takers could probably qualify for extra time if they tried. Now, extra time boosts LSAT scores by about one standard deviation, roughly 10 points. That would turn a 163 LSAT score into a 173 LSAT score. Now, I've been teaching the LSAT for 20 years now. I've coached thousands of students, many with accommodations, many without accommodations. Now, a lot of my own students have accommodations, and some of them are probably watching this right now. And so if that's you, I want you to hear me say this directly. If you qualify, get accommodations. I tell you that in our coaching sessions, I'm saying it here too. But I do want to give you the full picture. And the full picture includes research that most LSAT tutors and admissions consultants won't touch. Now, I raised my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175 under standard time to conditions. And so I know what it takes to perform with that time constraint. I also know what my accommodated students deal with, and I know many of them genuinely need the help that they're getting. And so this is not about questioning particular individuals. It's about a system that's producing scores that don't mean what everybody thinks they mean. And I want to share the full picture, even though it's uncomfortable, maybe especially because it's uncomfortable. Now, I want to get into the studies based on LSAC's own data. You can look this up yourself. The LSAT exists for one reason. It helps law schools predict who's going to do well in their first year. Higher LSAT score, higher first-year law school grades. That correlation, that relationship is real, and it holds up on average. But on average hides a big exception, and that exception involves extra time. LSAC studied students who received extra time on the LSAT. These students entered law school with higher scores than their classmates, with stronger admissions profiles. And so on paper, they looked like they would outperform everybody around them. But here is what actually happened. Almost 20% of those students ended up in the bottom 10% of their class. Only 10% of them made it into the top 20%. And so think about what that means in someone's actual life. You pick a law school based on your score. Maybe you turn down a scholarship somewhere else because your LSAT score tells you that you can and should aim higher. So you show up thinking you belong in the top half and you end up near the bottom. That is your class rank. It dictates whether you make law review, which firms interview you, and that sets the trajectory of your legal career. Now, a bigger study in 2017 looked at over 120,000 students who took the LSAT under standard timing and hundreds who got extra time. Their scores looked almost identical on paper. So you would assume they'd perform the same way in law school, but they didn't. The extra time group earned significantly lower grades on average. Now, here is the part that should really concern you. Law schools make admissions decisions using a formula that combines your LSAT score and your undergraduate GPA. That is the admissions index. And that is the number they actually use when making admissions decisions. And LSAC found that even that combined score still overpredicts for students who had extra time. The law school is using every tool they have, but their prediction still breaks. And LSAC knows all of this. They published about it. It's in their technical reports. You can look it up and see the report numbers yourself. But law schools don't get to see who had accommodations. LSAC doesn't tell them. And so a 170 with double time and a 170 under standard conditions show up on two applications looking exactly the same. And the admissions office has no way of knowing that one of those scores is a much weaker predictor of how that student will actually perform. LSAC has the data, law schools don't, and nothing has changed. Now, let me explain why extra time raises scores, but doesn't raise grades the same way. And once you get that, everything makes sense. The LSAT is brutally time pressured. If you've ever taken a practice section or a full exam, you've experienced this yourself. Most people run out of time. You're going to end up rushing the last few questions, you guess, you leave points on the table when the clock runs out. And that is not a flaw in the test, that is the test. The LSAT was designed to see how you reason under time pressure. That is the skill it's measuring. Now, extra time removes that pressure. With extra time, you don't have to rush as much, you don't have to guess as much, you can finish everything, and so of course your score goes up. But law school exams work differently. Law school exams are not multiple choice. They don't reward you for getting to the right answer eventually. They throw a long, messy fact pattern at you with unclear issues and a word limit, and they test whether you can spot the problems, organize your thinking, and write clean analysis before time runs out. Now, extra time on the LSAT helps you avoid rushing. Extra time on a law school exam isn't going to help you see an issue you never recognized in the first place. You can't find what you didn't spot no matter how long you have. And so there is a mismatch. The LSAT with extra time is testing your reasoning with the pressure removed. Law school is testing your reasoning with the pressure on, and the gap between those two experiences is exactly what shows up in LSAC's research. Now, the LSAT score is now promising something the law school grades don't deliver, because the version of the test they took isn't measuring the same thing that law school measures. Now, the people who get hurt by this are not cheaters. They aren't gaming the system. They're just students who trusted a score that the people who produced it already know is not reliable for their situation. LSAC has the research, but they're letting those students walk in blind, and that's what I'm trying to fix right now. So this begs the question, how did accommodations get to the point where 98% of requests get approved and the scores they produce don't predict what they're supposed to predict? Now, the old system was broken. I've got to say that up front. When I started teaching the LSAT back in 2005, accommodations were exceedingly rare. But by 2012, 2013, LSAC was approving only about 729 requests per year total across the whole country. The approval rate was about 70%. Now, the 30% who got denied definitely include people who should have been approved. I had students with real disabilities getting turned down, and LSAC was clearly doing things that were indefensible. So LSAC got sued. The DOJ and California's Department of Fair Employment and Housing both stepped in. LSAC agreed to a consent decree that forced them to completely rebuild the accommodations process. The decree required them to make accommodations at least as easy to get as for any other standardized test. And a panel set time and a half as the minimum accommodation, the least they'll give anybody. After that, the numbers skyrocketed. Approved requests jumped from 729 per year to over 25,000 per year. Approval rate went from 70% to 98%. Today, all you've got to have is a letter from a provider saying three things. A condition exists, it could affect test performance, please grant this student accommodations. That is it. There is no requirement to show the condition actually hurts your scores. And a federal law forbids LSAC from asking whether medication or treatment has already solved the problem. They can only ask if the condition exists. And time and a half is just the minimum. Some students get double time, some get triple time. I've heard of students getting 160 minutes per section, while standard timing is 35 minutes per section. And so at 160 minutes for a single section, you could eat lunch in the middle of a section and still finish with time to spare. Whatever that is, it is not the same exam. Now, a student who tells LSAC they only need time and a quarter because that's where the university gives them, LSAC didn't even respond to that student telling them that. They approved time and a half the same day because the system cannot go lower. Even if a student asks for less, the answer is no, we're going to give you more. So to be clear, I do believe the old system was too restrictive, but the fix went far beyond. It overcorrected so far that the system can't even honor someone's request for less help than what's being offered. And meanwhile, LSAC is sitting on research showing the scores this system produces don't predict what they're supposed to predict. And there is another layer to this that almost nobody brings up. Getting accommodations requires documentation from a healthcare provider. A provider requires access, and access requires money or insurance. So imagine two students. Student A has insurance, got evaluated for ADHD in high school, has years of a documentation, and so applying for LSAT accommodations is just one more form. Student B has the same condition, same struggles, but grew up without insurance, never got tested, has no documentation, nobody ever wrote anything down. Student A gets time and a half, student B gets the standard 35 minutes per section. So the system that's supposed to create equity is easier to access for students who already had advantages. And the students who need the most help, low income, first gen, uninsured, are the least likely to get it. And so when I started, accommodations came out maybe once or twice per year. And the students who had them had serious conditions. There was no ambiguity about it. But now the range has changed completely. Students with profound disabilities who clearly need every bit of support, and students who got a letter after one session with a therapist. The system processes both the same way, same form, same 98% approval rate, same time and a half minimum. Now, I've watched the shift over the last few years where students who aren't sure they need accommodations feel like they have to get them because they know everybody else is getting them, and so skipping that process feels like giving away points. And so when the system makes you feel foolish for not applying, something has clearly broken. And there's a problem here that no one's talking about, which is that bar exam accommodations are much harder to get. They have much stricter standards. And the biggest factor in getting approved for them is a documented history of accommodations throughout school. And so let's say you had no accommodations in undergrad, you get diagnosed before the LSAT, you're approved at 98% rate, score goes up, get into a better law school, get more scholarship money, you get accommodations in law school also, and 3 years of extra time on every exam. But then you sit for the bar and the accommodations might not be there. And so if you relied on extra time for 4 years and it disappears on the most consequential test of your career, that is a serious problem. You don't want to be in a position where the support gets pulled away at the worst possible moment. And what makes it worse is that LSAC's own research shows that extra time scores overpredict law school performance. And so the same pattern that plays out between the LSAT and law school could play out between law school and the bar. The accommodations help you get in, but they don't guarantee you'll perform the same way once the conditions change. And so what should you actually do with all of this? If you have a documented condition, of course, apply for accommodations. The score boost is real. The scholarship money is real. Don't prevent yourself from getting what you are entitled to. But you do also want to understand what your score does and does not tell you. LSAC's own research says extra time scores overpredict law school performance, meaning your LSAT isn't necessarily a reliable predictor of how law school is going to feel. Go in with that knowledge. You also want to get your documentation in order early and thoroughly, because if the standards ever tighten, a vague letter from a provider who saw you once isn't going to hold up. And if you don't yet have accommodations, prepare for the LSAT as if accommodations might not be available to you. Be ready for anything. And remember that your standard time score is a better predictor of how you'll actually perform in law school. And LSAC's own research says this. Law schools can't see the difference on your application, but the difference is real. Your 170 means exactly what it says. And you also want to build some cushion into your law school list. Know that what you've accomplished under standard conditions is harder than it's ever been. Now, here is what I think should change. I want to go on the record about this. The most obvious fix would be to redesign the LSAT so time matters less. Make the questions harder and give everybody more time. move the difficulty from speed to reasoning, because if time stops being what makes the LSAT hard, extra time stops being an advantage. Nobody has to lose accommodations. Nobody has to get flagged. You just got to stop breaking the LSAT based on the clock. And LSAT scores would actually predict law school performance better, because law school is about reasoning under complexity, not about the timing.